Welcome to Archaeology Insights, where we dig deep, sometimes literally, into the ways we think about the past. Archaeology sits at the fascinating intersection of science and storytelling. It's a discipline that can reveal incredible insights from the tiniest clues, a shard of pottery, a fragment of bone, a faint trace of ancient footprints. But today we're talking about the big picture, where archaeology so often goes off the rails. You see, archaeology has a narrative problem, and that problem is baked into how we approach the past itself. The truth is, most of what we think we know about history isn't grounded in hard evidence. It's built on speculation, stories we tell ourselves, and sometimes even propaganda. So today, we're asking a tough question. Is the grand story of human history nothing more than a patchwork of guesses stitched together to make it feel complete? Or worse, are we taught stories contrived to serve private interests? And if that's true, how can we do better? All right, let's start with the fundamentals. Archaeology is, at its core, about pieces, small, incomplete pieces of a much larger puzzle. Imagine you're on a dig and uncover a single shard of pottery. That shard can tell you something remarkable. Maybe you figure out the clay came from 100 miles away, suggesting trade. Or maybe you identify the firing technique and link it to a specific culture. But that shard doesn't come with a backstory. You don't know why it was made or how it got there. And yet, we humans can't resist creating one. Maybe you picture a bustling marketplace, merchants haggling over goods, trade routes connecting distant lands. It's a compelling story, but is it true? The reality is, most archaeological artifacts can't tell us the broader social, economic, or cultural dynamics of the people who made or used them. Without corroborating evidence, every attempt to connect those dots is a leap of faith. This brings us to the idea of the historical canon. The canon is that grand narrative we're all taught in school, the timeline of human progress from prehistoric hunter-gatherers to modern civilization. But let's be clear, this canon is a myth. Why? Because it prioritizes coherence over complexity. It smooths over contradictions and cherry-picks evidence to tell a story that feels complete even when it isn't. And here's the kicker, the canon is rarely neutral. It's shaped by those in power, whether they're governments, academics, or cultural elites. Let's take a moment to think about why this happens. Historical canons are tools of legitimacy. They validate the status quo. A nation-state might fund archaeological digs to prove it has ancestral claims to a contested land. Academic institutions might cling to outdated theories because they're tied to prestigious scholars. Even alternative historians, those who challenge mainstream views, often fall into the same trap, twisting evidence to fit their own agendas. The result? A history that reflects the priorities of its authors rather than the complexity of the past. Here's where the problem gets even more interesting, and even more frustrating. Archaeological evidence is inherently fragmentary. For every artifact we find, there are countless others lost forever, consumed by time, destroyed by natural disasters, or buried in places we'll never look. And even when we do uncover something, we often lack the context to make definitive interpretations. Let me give you a practical example: isotopic analysis. This is one of archaeology's most advanced tools. It can tell us where a material came from, down to the region where its minerals were formed. Cool, right? Except that knowing where something came from doesn't tell us who made it, why it was made, or how it was used. Did it arrive through trade, through conquest? Was it carried by a single traveler, or did it represent a well-established exchange network? These are the kinds of questions we want to answer but can't. And yet, time and again, we create elaborate narratives to fill the gaps. Now, let's talk about science. Science is messy. It's iterative. It's about formulating hypotheses, testing them, and constantly revising them as new evidence comes to light. But archaeology, when it tries to tell grand historical narratives, often does the opposite. Instead of embracing uncertainty, it seeks closure. Instead of presenting competing hypotheses, it privileges a single, authoritative story. Why does this happen? Because humans crave stories. We want to make sense of the past, and we want that sense-making to feel definitive. But definitive stories aren't science. They're fiction. So what's the alternative? A responsible archaeology, one that focuses on what the evidence can tell us and nothing more. Instead of trying to explain a civilization's rise and fall, we might hypothesize about the specific function of an artifact. Instead of claiming a trade route existed, we might say it's one possibility among many. This might not feel as satisfying as a grand historical narrative, but it's honest. So where do we go from here? How do we confront the challenges of fragmentary evidence, the allure of grand narratives, and the biases baked into our interpretations? The answer isn't to abandon the stories altogether, but to approach them with humility and curiosity. Here's the thing. Archaeology doesn't belong to any one group. It's not the sole property of academics, governments, or even passionate hobbyists. The story of the past belongs to all of us, and it's far too vast and complex to be reduced to a single perspective. If we really want to understand where we come from, we need to adopt a wider lens. That means asking questions that don't just confirm what we think we know, but challenge us to see the evidence and ourselves differently. It means acknowledging that no single interpretation is final, that every piece of evidence might tell multiple stories, and it means getting involved. You don't need to be an archaeologist to start engaging with the past in a meaningful way. You can start right now. Read widely, explore alternative interpretations, and examine the evidence for yourself. Look for patterns, make connections. Consider how these fragments of the past inform not just history, but your own understanding of the world. The past is more than just a puzzle. It's a mirror reflecting the choices, struggles, and triumphs of humanity. The more perspectives we bring to it, the clearer that reflection becomes. That's why we created Archaeology Insights. To open up the world of archaeology, to help you see that it's not just about digging in the dirt, it's about digging into ideas. It's about exploring the evidence, challenging the assumptions, and embracing the complexity of our shared human story. So here's our challenge to you. Don't just listen. Take what you've learned and dive deeper. Seek out the evidence. Question the narratives you've been taught. Think about how the past connects to the present and to your own life. What might those ancient fragments, those pottery shards, those bones, those footprints, teach us about community, resilience, or the choices we make today? How might exploring those connections enrich your understanding of yourself and the world around you? This isn't just about history, it's about perspective. It's about curiosity, and most of all, it's about possibility. Thanks for joining me on Archaeology Insights. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps others discover our channel. And remember, history isn't a closed book. It's an open question. Until next time, keep asking, keep searching, and stay curious.